It's very easy, I think, whether you're looking at this internationally or federally, to look at the relative economic impact for various parts of the world, or even in the United States for various regions in the country. For example, California is a very low emitting state. We have just a relatively clean use of fuel, both for particularly for electricity. And there are other parts of the country that are, you could say, very high emitting states. And the way you set this program up can have profound impacts on both sets, high emitting states or low emitting states. So there is sort of a pie, like there is almost with any federal legislation, that needs to be divided up. So I think it's really important to get back to looking at the larger picture. It's a serious issue. It requires a transformation of the economy overall, and you just have to sort of get everyone together and realize they need to solve this problem in a very cooperative way, and then deal with these issues as to how you might divide up the relative economic impact from that perspective.
It's interesting because I think each of us, I'm engaged on a periphery of this particular area too, and in the cocktail conversations that come up, we are in some respects lucky here in California that our profile in costs and in emissions is lower because of our lack of using coal.
Yes, it's a key allocation issue, or how do you allocate out the cost responsibility, particularly in the electric sector. And to be balanced, both sides have compelling arguments. In California, what we would say is we have low emissions with respect to our electricity production. We've done much of what needs to be done already. We have very strong energy efficiency programs. We have a renewables program, and maybe our rates are a little higher because we've taken those steps already. So we shouldn't be burdened so much by the costs of Waxman-Markey or some other federal legislation. But on the other hand, there's compelling arguments for some of the coal-intensive states. They are often located where there's real difficult economic times. Not that California is not experiencing that right now, but also there are costs of moving from where they are today to where they need to be can be quite expensive, and the journey they have to go in terms of emissions reductions is further than ours, and it's quite possible that their costs on a proportionate basis will be higher. So there's compelling arguments on both sides, and it's just a matter, I think, of getting together and coming up with a reasonable compromise so we can all move forward.
Thank you. And for John Lynn, one of our audience members mentions that they've heard that China claims that it lacks the financial and technical resources to monitor greenhouse gas emissions. Has that been your experience in your view of China's current view?
Yes, I'm agreeing with that assessment, especially human capital, in terms of training the skilled personnel that understand all the protocols to document emissions. And it's a relatively new subject in China, and there are very few people trained in that effort.
Good. I'd like to turn just a moment and throw another country into this matrix we're talking about, and ask Chris Plant in particular to discuss the role of India in both the climate dialogue in India in terms of where it is economically and as a contributor to carbon emissions today.
Well, thanks, Terry.
I told you there might be a couple of
I've spent more time in India than in China, and have had many more questions directed at me about climate change. We have a water security project, or series of activities and projects that we work on with local partners in India. And India and China share watersheds. And the one of the biggest problems that India faces right now is as it ramps up and tries to improve its energy supply and its energy, to meet its energy needs. A lot of that energy gets used to pump water out of diminishing underground aquifers, and so there's this tremendous perverse problem that goes on as the electric lines get out to the rural regions. They pump water out, and the water's gone, and it's a bad situation. One of the interesting things about coal, we worked on an atmospheric mercury monitoring project a few years ago, and coal has a signature. It has signatures from wherever it comes from in the world, and so you can tell where coal is being burned, whether it's in China or whether it's in India. Even years after it's been burned, you can figure out where the combustion is taking, or not where the combustion is taking place, but where the coal is coming from. And India is going to use all the coal that it can to improve the lives of the 400 million people who are still without basic services that you and I cannot, unless you have lived in an ashram there, cannot imagine what it's like to live in repeated 110-degree days when the electricity start, or when the temperatures start to go up even higher, and then water becomes even more at a premium, and your crops start to wither and all those things. The transformative part about this depressing piece is that the Indians are quite bullish on making progress. There are a lot of institutions and organizations working in a more concerted way than a lot of Indian policy groups are known to work to try to collaborate on climate change policy. It's a very exciting time to be in India, as India's just behind China in terms of its carbon footprint, and they have every they're very bullish on finding solutions. They're not caught up in a climate change, is it happening discussion. They've looked at the evidence, and the one interesting thing here about this science debate and all is that in the early 80s, the U.S. Congress came up with a bill that defined a solid waste as a solid, liquid, or contained gas that was then thrown away. That just kind of drove the engineers that we would talk to just crazy when you started talking about a solid as also a liquid or a gas. It's that kind of craziness that happens in policy circles, and you kind of go, well, what is the reality here? The Indians have been very serious about this for quite a while, and I recommend, if you're interested, in taking a look around and seeing what they're doing.
Great. Well, thank you.
From a conversation I had with some people who know CDM well a few months ago that basically said CDM's flawed, and then someone called it the China development mechanism. I'm not sure, and I don't have a whole lot to comment on that, except that after Brazil, there are parts of and certainly the Congo in Africa, there are parts of Southeast Asia that still remain forested enough to be very valuable in very many ways. And the whole idea of the opportunity available to protect these areas is more important than ever.